Tonight we're going to learn about DNA. What we're going to learn about DNA, we're going to learn about DNA from the crime scene through defense expert appointment. So first thing we're going to do is we're going to learn about the crime dispatch or what happened at the scene. But before we start that, we're lucky enough to be associated with a group called Cybergenetics, run by Dr. Mark Perlin, one of the authorities in the United States on DNA. Good evening once again. Think back to March 20th, 2016. There is a dispatch in the city of Pittsburgh. The dispatch says, a driver in a silver Honda Accord on Penn Avenue, the 1300 block, with a passenger hanging out the window shooting at another vehicle which is unknown. There's also reports of a backseat passenger, so the total number in the car is 3. The descriptions of the people in the car are all unknown. We do know they're males, but we do not know the race. With that said, there is now a pursuit by vehicle 6.2 of the City of Pittsburgh Police, and we just got another notice that the Honda Accord has crashed and the 3 people have exited and are running. The last report is that one of the people who was running had a hat and the hat has fallen off. Police are now on the scene and they've cordoned off the area. The first thing done at a police scene. The next thing is the MCU are there. MCU stands for Mobile Crime Unit. They now proceed and they find a hat 30 feet from the Honda Accord. They place it into a bag. The bag is then taken where, ladies and gentlemen? To the crime lab. At the crime lab, the bag is brought in and is addressed as March 20th, 2016, number 2.66. And it says, a bag with a hat from the crime scene where a Honda Accord has crashed. With that, this is the beginning of chain of custody, ladies and gentlemen? No, it's not. The chain started at the time the hat was placed in the bag. We now will learn what happens at the crime lab. We'll learn what happens when the hat is taken out of the bag and the procedures and process.
So 2 things happen to the crime lab. The first step is that the crime lab takes the hat with the DNA on it and transforms it into data. The second step is interpreting that data to produce match statistics to other individuals who might be associated with a crime. So the first step is generating data. What does the crime lab do? They take the hat, they may make cuttings of it, they take swabs from it, and they take the biological material and they put it into test tubes, and they first extract the DNA. That's the first step. Extracting the DNA from the hat. Separating the DNA that's on the hat from what's not DNA on the hat. The second step that the crime lab does is they take the extracted DNA, which may only have a few hundred cells. Each cell has a nucleus with DNA in it, but we can't detect 100 cells. We can detect DNA if there's millions or billions of labeled DNA molecules. So in order to get the DNA amplified in a way that we can detect, there's a procedure called polymerase chain reaction, or PCR. So with polymerase chain reaction, or PCR, scientists can make millions of copies of each DNA sentence, of each sequence of DNA. And that's the second step. The PCR makes millions of copies in a PCR machine. Over a few hours, the amount of DNA keeps doubling. First there's 1, then 2, then 4, then 8, then 16, then 32, until after 28 cycles there's millions of labeled DNA that can be detected. The third step of what happens in the crime lab is the scientists take all that labeled DNA out of a tube, They put it on a DNA sequencer, which is also called a genetic analyzer. On that genetic analyzer, the DNA is separated by size into short alleles and long alleles, sized, and the amounts of DNA from each allele that's present in the data from the hat is detected with a laser that shines at the fluorescent tag and produces a peak. Tall peaks mean there's a lot of DNA that's present for that fragment. Short peaks means there's very little DNA. That data is all collected after it's been analyzed by laser on the genetic analyzer, and looking at 15 to 20 different genetic locations on different chromosomes, scientists now have a file, and that file is an electronic file that has the signals from every one of these locations. So first they extract, then they amplify, and finally the crime lab separates and detects the amplified DNA from the hat in order to get signals. What do they do with the signals? This is the second part. This is the interpretation of the data. Simple data with just one person in it is very easy, but DNA with two people or more, or low levels or degraded DNA, can have more than one possible answer. And for that, for these mixtures of DNA, scientists will use software or manual methods or some approach, depending on the laboratory, in order to interpret the DNA evidence. We'll be hearing today about a simple method used in a lab that involves just looking at the obvious features in the data. Other laboratories and groups use much more sophisticated methods that, using artificial intelligence and data mining, can reach into the data to pull out the genetic types and separate them from the data. Regardless, afterwards, a comparison is made to the defendants or suspects in a case in order to produce a DNA match statistic. So that's what happens in a lab. First, the DNA is taken from an evidence item and turned into data. And secondly, that data is separated further into genetic types, and comparisons are made in order to calculate DNA match statistics.
At this point, we're going to have the Assistant DA Sanders call her expert witness from the crime lab. But before that, we have to explain to you what happens when an expert is brought to the stand. They have to be qualified under Pennsylvania Rules of Evidence 702. The way you're qualified is based upon your education, your experience, your training, and your knowledge. Now, when you do that, you look at everybody's background. Very few people are not qualified. The most important thing is to remember, once you're qualified once in a county, whether it be Washington County or Allegheny County, usually the next time you come to testify, it's what you call a stipulation. So I would stipulate. The last thing I want to explain to you is what's called a CV, a curriculum vitae. What you do is you get their CV from the opposing party for the expert, and you go through that, and that's how you figure out whether the person has education, training, experience, or knowledge. Those are the four categories you will know and you will be tested on. With that said, we will now have the Assistant DA Sanders do direct examination of their expert. The expert is Dr. Marlowe.
I'd like to call to the stand Dr. Marlowe.
Please raise your right hand. You swear to tell the whole truth, nothing but your truth, so help you God in this last great day?
I do.
Thank you.
I'd first like to offer a DNA analysis report written by Dr. Marlowe, which I'll mark as Commonwealth's Exhibit 1. Sir, could you please state your name for the court?
Dr. Philip Marlowe,
And could you spell your last name, please?
Marlowe.
And I understand you've prepared a presentation to help explain your results in this case.
I have.
What is DNA biology?
Humans have trillions of cells in their body. Inside most of these cells are chromosomes. There's 23 pairs of chromosomes, where you get half of the chromosomes from your mother and half of them from your father. If we were to unwind these chromosomes, you would see they're made up of DNA tags. And scientists look at specific locations on these chromosomes to identify people.
What is a short tandem repeat, or STR?
A short tandem repeat is a DNA word that is repeated in tandem like boxcars on a train.
And what is an allele?
An allele is the number of these repeats that you get. You get one allele from your mother and one allele from your father.
What is an electropherogram, or EPG?
An electropherogram is a DNA trace showing the amount and sizes of DNA fragments.
How does allele size appear on an EPG?
You see it on the horizontal or x-axis, which shows the number of bases in a DNA fragment.
What is a relative fluorescent unit, or RFU?
The relative fluorescent unit is how much the DNA glows when it's hit by the laser. And this just shows the amount of the DNA at that fragment.
What is a threshold?
A threshold is the way a laboratory sorts out data that we're more confident in from data that we're less confident in.
Why do you use a threshold with DNA mixtures?
Again, so that we are very confident in the data that we are reporting.
How is the HAT mixture data summarized in an allele table?
Our allele table shows, each row shows a different DNA location. We may have 15 of these locations. In the next column of this table, we show the alleles that are above threshold at that location.
How is the DNA of defendant Terry Lennox summarized in the allele table?
In our third column, we show Terry Lennox's alleles that are above the threshold.
What did you observe about the alleles?
The data indicated that a partial profile containing DNA from 2 or more contributors was obtained from the HAT.
Examining some STR loci, could you include Terry Lennox in the DNA mixture?
If I could refer to my notes, please. A DNA mixture profile was developed from the HAT. Terry Lennox cannot be eliminated as a contributor to this DNA mixture profile.
Which loci show that Lennox is included in the mixture?
There are 3 loci, that is D3, D7, and D13.
Why are these loci inclusionary?
If we look at the table on the previous slide, you can see that the alleles for Terry Lennox are included in the alleles from the HAT mixture.
What is your combined probability of inclusion, or CPI, match statistic at these loci?
Again, I'll refer to my notes. The probability of randomly selecting an unrelated individual who would be included as a contributor to the DNA mixture is approximately 1 in 11 in the Caucasian population.
Once again, good evening. At this point of a trial is where the defense attorney does the cross-examination of the Commonwealth's expert, Dr. Marlowe. What we're trying to do is try to put into the juror's mind or the judge's mind in a non-jury that there is some inconsistencies or some facts that may be open for different ideas or conclusions. With that, I'm ready to cross-examine Dr. Marlowe. Good evening, Dr. Marlowe. My name is Michael Mappin. I represent Terry Lennox.
Good evening.
I will ask these questions, and if I'm going too quickly, please ask me to repeat, and we will start. Does the HAT EPG show allele peaks at locus CSF?
Yes, it does.
Do these peaks have different heights?
Yes, they do.
Do taller peaks correspond to more DNA from an allele?
Yes, they do.
If a person contributes more DNA to a mixture, are their allele peaks taller?
Typically, yes.
Does your mixture interpretation use peak height information?
Yes, we use the peaks that are above the threshold.
Okay. Doctor, at locus CSF, applying a threshold discards allele peaks 10, 11, and 13. Doesn't applying a threshold discard DNA information?
Yes, it does.
Suppose you lower the threshold from 100 RFU to 50 RFU. In fact, what is RFU?
RFU is the relative fluorescence units, which show how much DNA is present at that DNA size.
So let me repeat the question, Dr. Marlowe. Suppose you lowered the threshold from 100 RFU to 50 RFU. Wouldn't that now include allele peak 13?
Yes, it would.
So changing the threshold changes which alleles you consider in your analysis, correct?
Yes, it would.
Have you scientifically validated the effect of thresholds on DNA mixture statistics?
No, we have not.
So what is the scientific basis for using thresholds on mixture data?
These methods are used by the Federal Bureau of Investigation, the FBI, and are approved by them.
If you would agree with me, if you change the threshold, could the HAT alleles in your table change?
Yes, they would.
So then, if you have a higher threshold, could that exclude people who were previously included?
Yes, it would.
So a higher threshold could increase the CPI match statistic, correct?
Yes.
Could a lower threshold include people who were previously excluded?
Yes, it would.
Could a lower threshold decrease the CPI match statistic?
Yes.
So in fact, doctor, if you change the threshold, could some number other than 32 alleles be detected?
Yes.
Would you agree, doctor, that Terry Lennox was included in the DNA HAT mixture before or after you calculated the CPI match statistic?
Again, following the FBI-approved protocol, we see if the person can be included, and then we develop a match statistic.
So, once again, was Terry Lennox included?
Yes.
But when you adjusted the threshold, was Terry Lennox excluded?
Possibly.
So, in reality, adjusting the threshold could have made him included or excluded, correct?
Correct.
So your inclusion calculation only confirmed what you had already decided before, correct?
Correct.
So if you chose the three loci, D3, D7, and D13, that's because Terry Lennox was included in them, correct?
Correct.
And is it also true you didn't choose the other 12 loci because that evidence might show that Terry Lennox was innocent or not included, correct?
Correct. Again, I was following our protocol.
Once again, doctor, I know you're following your protocol, but you would agree with me that the 12 loci that you did not show may have shown that Terry Lennox was not included, correct?
Correct.
Could any of these 12 loci exclude my client from the hat and prove his innocence?
We don't provide exclusionary statistics. We can either include or be inconclusive.
So let me give you a hypothetical. You didn't include the 12 loci, correct?
Correct.
So you would agree with me that if the lab had done these other 12 loci, it's in your opinion, within a reasonable degree of scientific authority, that Terry Lennox may have been excluded, correct?
Possibly, yes.
So Dr. Marlowe, you would agree with me that 3 divided by 15 is 20%, correct?
Correct.
And you would agree that 12 divided by 15 is 80%, correct?
Correct.
So you would, if you were in a crime lab, you would want to have evidence that talks about 80% versus 20%, correct?
Correct.
So you would agree with me that you chose the 20% of data that shows guilt, correct?
We chose the loci that follow our protocol.
Your Honor, I would instruct Dr. Marlowe to answer the question posed to him, not to what he thinks is the right answer. So once again, I'll repeat that. So you chose the 20% of data that shows guilt in respect to Terry Lennox, correct?
Correct.
And you ignored the other 80% that may have shown Terry Lennox to be innocent, correct?
We considered all those loci, they just weren't used in the statistic.
Once again, Your Honor, I would ask that this Honorable Court instruct Dr. Marlowe to answer the question posed to him, not to what he thinks is the right answer. So with that, Dr. Marlowe, you would agree with me that the 80% of the loci you ignored in this case, correct?
Correct.
Okay, and so you would agree with me there is a possibility, I'm not saying correct, that this 80% of the loci could have shown that in fact Terry Lennox was innocent, correct?
It's possible.
Don't you think that's a biased approach to take the 20% versus the 80%? At this point, the district attorney, the assistant district attorney would object, and the judge would say, sustained, continue, Mr. Mackin. At this point, I would say, I have no further questions, Your Honor. Thank you, Dr. Marlowe.
Thank you.
At this point, class, what the defense would do is they would bring their expert. What you're going to see in the matter tonight is you're going to see a motion to appoint an expert. Because any time the Commonwealth would present an expert on DNA, the defense would also present a defense expert, and what we do would do a motion to have an expert appointed. You have to understand that in most cases that have DNA, they do not go to trial. Because once, as you know, the prosecution says, we have DNA that shows it's your client, you start to wilt and you figure a way to make a better deal or a plea agreement for your client. With that said, the only thing I want to do is give a quick wrap up. What you've learned here today or tonight is that what DNA is, what happens with DNA in a crime lab, a theoretical, direct, and cross-examination of the Commonwealth's expert. This is more than you'll ever see because these kind of cases do not go to trial very often. So with that said, please review this tape The questions for your next quiz will be based upon all the different things you learned tonight, from qualifications of an expert, DNA, what happens at the scene, how you cordon off, and how you collect it. And also, you're going to learn about the direct and the cross-examination of an expert, and the appointment of an expert for the defense based upon the motion. Thank you very much. And also, thank you to Dr. Perlin in cybergenetics. Thank you.